My name's Callum Dugan, and I used to be an archaeologist. Now, though, I try and use the past to understand the present. You may be tempted, in the current refugee crisis, to see it as something unprecedented, something that's never happened before. The sad lesson of history, though, is that it has. How can we use the past to understand what's going on today? Well, to try and do that, we're going to look at the Irish famine. The Irish famine, or An Chomhairle Mór, was a series of failed harvests between 1845 and 1852. Irish farmers were massively dependent on the potato, and as such the blight annihilated entire harvests. The blight was not something that the Irish brought upon themselves. It's a normal biological process. It is uncontrollable, in the same way that the Syrians cannot control the Syrian civil war. The British government took 2 years to acknowledge that a famine was going on in Ireland and to arrange basic aid and relief efforts. Unfortunately, to qualify for any of this aid, you needed to already be destitute, which is a clear-cut case of too little, too late. Adding to this, the refusal to impose any sort of export controls, and you have the insane situation where, throughout the famine, Ireland was a net exporter of food. A government that is at best incompetent and at worst actively hostile is something that I suspect the Syrian people understand far better than I. All of this, though, led to mass starvation. Of Ireland's 8 million people before the famine, 1 million died, and 2 million, that's 1/4 of the Irish population, emigrated. To compare that to Syria, the United Nations estimates that approximately 4 million Syrians are currently refugees, and that is about 1/4 of Syria's 2010 population. When the Irish tried to emigrate by boat, they did so on what were known as the coffin ships, and I'm afraid that means exactly what you think it means. Steamers would arrive in their port of destination, the doors would be thrown open, and it would be discovered that the entire passenger list had died, be that of starvation or more commonly of disease spreading like wildfire through the massively overcrowded decks. Our media are somewhat uncomfortable with the refugee crisis, and to underline that point, I'd like to read a letter to the Times of London on the topic of the refugee. The idea of being a labourer and engaging in general employment is revolting to him. The word improvement is not in his vocabulary. I verily believe that, if the potato famine in Ireland were to continue 5 years longer, it would prove a greater blessing to that country than any yet devised. That was written in 1846, and yet the sentiment is all too familiar. What is our conclusion here then? Firstly, that despite what some commentators will insist, population movements on this scale are nothing to do with economics. They are to do with simple desperation. These things did not happen lightly then, and they are not happening lightly now. Secondly, history repeats itself. The same stories emerge of incompetent governance, of overcrowded boats run by unscrupulous individuals, and a media that is bizarrely hostile to some of the most desperate people imaginable. Thirdly, this is a massive shift in the Syrian national character. There's a reason that Irish historians divide time into pre-famine and into post-famine, and they do this because it is an apocalyptic event that changes the entire game. Full disclosure, all of my ancestors, in one way or another, arrived in Scotland fleeing the famine. I'm not Irish. My parents are not Irish. Their parents are not Irish. The last Irish in our family line are a century or more dead, and yet it is a legacy that we carry with us. There are songs sung at football matches about the famine. There is the suggestion that I should return home to a country that is simply not mine. When we talk about what is happening in Syria, we use the word atrocity, and we do so correctly, but sometimes we forget that an atrocity is not an isolated event. It is not something that just happens and then stops happening. There are scars. There is a legacy to bear. That's what makes it an atrocity. The population of Ireland at the time of the famine was 8 million people. Today, it is less than 5 million.